On Friday, the country will have been in lockdown for exactly a year. From the declaration of the state of disaster, President Cyril Ramaphosa has had the responsibility of communicating the latest developments to the nation in a manner that would instill confidence and yet still keep them updated. The big question is, how has he fared over the past 12 months? For more on this, I'm joined by political analyst Daniel Silke. Mr. Silke, a very good afternoon to you and thank you for your time. In your estimation, the president has had a very difficult job to do, to navigate what the entire world was in trepidation about, what the entire world was in an area of uncertainty about. How did President Cyril Ramaphosa fare in keeping the nation informed, yet at the same time out of panic mode?
Thank you for having me. I think, there's mixed fortunes for the president over the course of the last year or so. You're right in indicating that this was an unscripted event, so there was no playbook here. There was no precedent as to how to react. And not only did President Ramaphosa have the difficulty of working in uncharted waters, but just about every other major leader across the world had similar difficulties, some with greater success than others. So in all fairness to President Ramaphosa, I think that from a personal point of view, and I'm going to stress this, from a personal point of view, he was able, I think, to take the country along with him over the course of the last year. He was able, personally, to keep South Africans, I think, relatively satisfied in terms of information and relatively hopeful that government was doing the right thing. But I think the real problem for President Ramaphosa is not necessarily whether he was successful himself, and I think he was. The problem was that around him, the South African economy was stuttering. His own cabinet were very often not performing as well. Issues of corruption were still there concurrently, and all the political issues that were there before COVID, state capture et al., simply continued during COVID and mushroomed as well. So I think that the other issues, to an extent, took the gloss off what President Ramaphosa did offer, and the real rub comes now during what should be a much more efficient vaccine rollout campaign. That's where the president is going to be judged, more than on his ability to take the country with him over the last year.
You've touched on some very pertinent issues there, Mr. Silke, and perhaps let's break some of those down. You mentioned the PPE scandal and how the president has then had to deal with that. You've mentioned issues, well, you didn't mention it, but this was part of the problems, police brutality, where people under the military were being accosted and people not being treated with human dignity. What did those particular situations reveal about the president's leadership in the manner in which he dealt with them?
Well, I think we didn't see, effective enough decision-making from the president. He was reactive rather than proactive. But, of course, these events happened in an unscripted environment. Still, I think that the one weakness, if we could really critique the president over the last year, was that he perhaps didn't take necessary action when it came to transgressions amongst his own senior officials, be they in the security cluster or whether they were in the broader bureaucracy, as you correctly mentioned, the Gauteng PPE scandal. And again, this is not just a COVID issue. This goes to an issue of whether the president can really elicit accountability from those who serve him. And I would certainly argue that there is not sufficient accountability within cabinet and within the broader administration currently.
There was quite an interesting spectacle when South Africans commented about the president wearing the South African National Defence Force uniform. Granted, he is the commander-in-chief of the country's armed forces. But when South Africans were questioning whether or not the president should be wearing that uniform, there is a salient message that underlies all of that. What would you make of that, South Africans questioning?
I think the issue, more so than that particular issue, was the issue of the state of disaster that South Africa has been under for the last year, and the effect of the use of the Coronavirus Command Council, which has in some instances usurped or replaced a democratic accountability within South Africa. Now, it is a state of emergency. It is a pandemic. Those issues I'm well aware of. But I do think that if there were any signals that South Africa was sort of centralizing its power, was taking away aspects of democratic accountability that we have long fought for, that perhaps played into that particular narrative. And if I'm to be fair to the president, and if I'm really looking at the world in general, we've seen a number of countries grapple with this issue of the centralization of political power. And The Economist magazine recently did a very interesting study to show that democracy had actually taken something of a knock globally over the course of the last year as governments have usurped power away from democratic institutions. And I think the military uniform itself was perhaps symbolism of that, but we didn't quite fall into the precipice of really reducing South Africa to a central command fully, I'm pleased to say.
And what impact do you believe the banning of cigarettes and alcohol sales, what impact did that have on the economy, and what impact did that have on industry's faith in President Cyril Ramaphosa?
Well, I certainly think that some of the regulations applied under the more severe lockdown regulations, even the closure of beaches in South Africa over the prime holiday season now a few months ago, I think that did undermine confidence in the president. I think many of these regulations seemed somewhat arbitrary, and I think that at a time when you really need to carry South Africans together into these uncharted waters, there were very poor decisions made on those issues you've highlighted. Obviously, the economic effect has been absolutely immense, particularly on our travel and leisure industry, and we are still largely feeling the effects of that and will feel the effects on that for any number of months and possibly years to some recovery.
But before I let you go, we're not quite at the end of this, but we are at the beginning pretty much of our vaccination journey. How does the president fare as far as the vaccination of the nation is concerned and the procurement of the proper vaccination?
Yeah, this is the ultimate test for President Ramaphosa. We can almost put the regulations aside for the last year or so and battling with the various levels. The issue will be whether the president really can oversee an efficient vaccine rollout campaign. Because for all these detractors, for all of the internal angst within the ANC, for all of the economic hardship as a result of the regulations, whether they were good or bad, there is a chance at redemption for President Ramaphosa if we can get the vaccine rollout story effectively applied. And the jury is out on that as I speak to you right now. The person who will get the blame if we do not meet our targets, and in fact if the rollout is even more sluggish than it looks as though it's going to be, will be President Ramaphosa, and a lot will ride for his future on just how we handle this next phase of the pandemic.
Mr. Daniel Silke, thank you so much for your insights this afternoon. I guess from that summary, it is perhaps not so much how it begins, but how it ends for this COVID-19 story. Do stay with us. This is your Daytime Update right here on Newsroom Africa, Channel 405. More of your day's top stories. And we'll also be crossing back to the State Capture Commission when we return.